Excellent.
Well, I did not expect to make a part 2. However, with the success of the first video, I decided to make this video more so as a thank you message. I never expected to gain not only 7.5 thousand views on this video, but also over 100 subscribers. So thank you guys so much for the support. Without you, this video would not have happened. And now that I've ranked all of the characters in Gen 1, I figured why not rank not only all of the Gen 2 characters, but also the Gen 3 cast, seeing as both generations have a really small cast. In terms of ranking, this video would have been really hard to make, due to the uniqueness of the characters. Of all of the generations, the characters in Revenge of the Island and Pahkitew are widely considered to be the least liked due to their one-dimensional personalities, Pahkitew Island especially, so do expect unpopular opinions in this video. And as a final disclaimer, I highly recommend you watch part 1 of this video, as not only does it cover my opinions on the characters in Island and World Tour, but it also explains the different tiers. So, a 3-second warning. Are they gone? Well, in any case, if you're still watching this, then here is part 1's ranking. And yes, this ranking will follow up to the last one. So, without further ado, let's begin. First up, we have Stacy, the least liked Revenge of the Island character, and the first boot of the season, and it's really easy to see why. In the over 100 episodes of Total Drama, Stacy only actually got to compete in one of those episodes, and in that episode, she kept talking about her ancestors and their inventions, which got on everyone's nerves. And you can tell that the whole point of that character is to be cannon fodder for other characters to get development. There's not really much to say about Stacy's character because she didn't really do much. However, what I will say is that she did honestly have quite a bit of potential. The reason why she lied about her ancestors was because she wanted to make more friends. And it would have been really interesting if Stacy opened up about her actual life after warming up to her friends as opposed to...
And my great-great-great-aunt Dora actually taught Native Canadians to carve totems. Yeah, my great-great-great-uncle James invented log cabins.
However, we didn't. Why, Tia? Why does she exist? She is easily one of, if not the, least relevant Total Drama characters. Moving on to B, and despite him only competing for a few episodes, he managed to leave quite an impact on the show, being a well-liked character by the fandom, and it's really not that hard to see why. His inventions always got his team out of sticky situations, and his IQ was such a threatening weapon, and it was really fun to watch B's ideas come into fruition. And despite him not being able to speak, a picture is 1,000 words, and I can understand his facial expressions and actions way more than I can understand.
My great-great-great-uncle James invented...
Despite this, my issue with B is actually a positive I mentioned prior, being his inability to speak. Despite a picture being worth 1,000 words, it doesn't really work when said picture doesn't interact with the other characters. Character interaction is one of the most important elements to a character, and it highlights who that character is, their personality, friendships, fears, etc. So it doesn't really work when your character can't talk! Even though I can't name a single character dynamic a character had with B, I'm still gonna put him in the C tier. He was really entertaining to watch, and I do wish he made it further. On to Dawn, and here's where the list starts to get really shaky, because I actually love Dawn, and I can't explain why. Within the Total Drama community, Dawn has a really big cult following, which makes no sense, as there are quite a few Total Drama characters who have competed in quite a few seasons, and as a result, a lot of episodes. Dawn was in 5 episodes. And yet she is more popular than so many other characters. And it's really hard to explain why. She didn't really have a lot of character interactions, she didn't really have a lot of smart strategies, and it's really hard to pinpoint why Dawn is such a liked character. You know, despite the fact that she has the best character design. Oh yeah, and despite the fact that her character is just so interesting and so mysterious, to the point that we want to learn so much more about her. Oh yeah, and the fact that she has really interesting character dynamics with characters like Lightning, Scott, and Zoe, all of which we get to see different perspectives of through Dawn's character. And this line.
It's right there in your aura.
between your bladder control issues and your need to be dominated.
And who can forget
You weren't held enough as a child.
Mr. Coconut Tear?
I just think they're neat.
Next up, we have Seth Rogen, and man, I cannot believe that they added the Seth Rogen into Total Drama. I can't believe I get to watch characters like Dawn, Lightning, and fucking Donkey Kong all competing in the same show. Yo, isn't that epic? Okay, but jokes aside, I do actually also think that Sam is quite neat. Whilst I will admit he is definitely on the weaker side in terms of Total Drama Revenge of the Island characters, he was still quite a fun character. I feel like where Sam's character peaks is definitely his relationship with Dakota. Like, whilst it does start out rocky at first because of the differences they have, ultimately I do love Sam's like positivity throughout and the fact that he's willing to accept Dakota despite her being a mutated monster. Like, no joke, these guys are honestly a really cute couple. I would argue, second best Total Drama couple. And honestly, for the 6 episodes we had, he was honestly quite an interesting character. Hold on, 6? Wait, yeah, 6. If Sam only appeared in 6 episodes, what is he doing in Total Drama All-Stars? Like, I get you needed to balance the Total Drama Island and Revenge of the Island characters. However, wouldn't it have been better and made much more sense if you used someone who made it a lot further in the season? Someone like Brick, Anne-Maria, Dakota, and not Sam? And it could have actually been excusable if Sam actually got a storyline. I don't know. Maybe have him play an underdog role. But no, instead he's just a punching bag, a comic relief character who only lasts 4 episodes. Sam honestly felt like such a wasted slot, and it's no wonder that people would rather have Brick over him in All-Stars. And from what I've heard, the reason why Sam got chosen over Brick was because the Total Drama All-Stars writers thought that Sam would be a lot more enjoyable to write. However, when you watch Total Drama All-Stars, his character wasn't really that fun or enjoyable, so why was Sam chosen over Brick? Despite being awful in All-Stars, Sam was still a pretty enjoyable character in Revenge of the Island, so he does warrant a placement in the D tier because he's eh. Funnily enough, we move on to Brick, the character that should have been in Total Drama All-Stars, and it's not hard to see why. Brick is a really fun and entertaining character who never fails to make me smile with how funny and also charming his character is. Highlights of his character definitely involve his rivalry with Joe, as the two kept pushing each other beyond their limits, trying to one-up each other to prove who was stronger. Their rivalry was really fun to watch and was easily the best part of pre-merge. My only issue with Brick, however, is that he didn't really get a lot of screen time, especially away from Joe. Jeez, I sure wonder if a certain season could have fixed that if he was a part of it. However, if your only flaw is that we want to know more about you, then that must mean something, right? Honestly, Brick is not only a really good character, but he's also a really funny character, and I would absolutely love to watch Brick as a protagonist in a future season. Whilst Brick didn't get a lot of screen time, from what we did see of him, he was an absolutely fun character, and I do wish we get to see more in the future. So good job, G.I. Joke. A tier. Now we move on to Anne-Maria, another really fun character, and yeah, I don't really have too much to say about Anne-Maria. And that seems to be a recurring theme with the Total Drama Revenge of the Island characters. Like, yeah, they're cool, but can I say more? My favourite moments of her definitely involve her rivalry with Zoe and her character dynamic with Mike. Which, again, definitely should have been expanded on if Anne-Maria got a lot more episodes to her name.
Gee, if only a certain season could have fixed that.
Honestly, she was entertaining and iconic, and her elimination was really funny, so props for that. Anne-Maria is an A-tier pick, man, she's great. Also, I find it pretty funny that she quote-unquote predicted Total Drama-rama.
I never really watched Total Drama-rama, whatever, and...
Continuing the trend of underdeveloped Total Drama characters who I like anyways, we have Dakota. However, with Dakota, it's a lot easier to explain, because her character arc of going from a spoiled daddy's girl who wanted everything to go her way, to someone who's a lot nicer and warms up to people due to the experience she had as an intern within the show and getting tortured as a result was honestly really fun to watch, and I was rooting for her all the way. And on top of that, despite her being on the receiving end of the jokes, she was really funny. And she even had good character dynamics too, whether it would be her relationship with Sam or her friendship with Zoe. However, man, I thought the writers learned their lesson from Feral Zeke, but I guess not. Well, it's fine anyways, cause Dakota is pretty cool. B tier. Now let's talk about Mike, and to talk about his character, I need to divide him into two sections. Mike, the conception and idea, and Mike, the persona, who he actually is. Firstly, why was Mike created? Mike was created to represent people who have dissociative identity disorder, or DID for short, which is where someone has multiple distinct personalities. And something I really appreciate in Total Drama, especially in the later seasons, is how diverse the characters are, coming from different ethnic backgrounds and different sexual orientation. In the original season, 7 of the 22 characters are from a different ethnic background, which is less than a third of the cast. And in the newest season of Total Drama, 11 of the 16 characters are from a different ethnic background, which is over half the cast. And I'm really glad that the writers have taken the initiative to make the cast more diverse. And so it would make sense to create a character who has DID. So, that being said, was Mike a good representation of DID?
No, not really!
Now, don't get me wrong, the representation of DID within Mike's character is handled a lot better here than in other shows. And all things considered, it was handled pretty well in Revenge of the Island. Whether it would be the portrayal of memory loss within Mike's DID, or the different personalities all arising to deal with difficult situations that the main personality is too anxious to handle, such as Svetlana dealing with challenging physical activities. However, the representation of DID has a lot of flaws in Revenge of the Island and especially All Stars, due to... But before we get to Mal, I didn't really like how Mike's alternate personalities were mostly played for laughs, such as when Mike threw a boulder on himself for seemingly no reason. And I'm no psychologist, but I don't think a button would completely wipe out all of your personalities from existence. And as for Mal, the stereotype of an evil personality when it comes to DID representation is not great. Not only is it an inaccurate representation of the stereotype, but it's also really harmful. And it's what makes Mal such a terribly written character. And even outside of Mal, the show goes out of its way to show that having DID is pretty much a liability, because that was the reason why Mike got out in Revenge of the Island. Which honestly proves that Grand Theft Auto is probably one of the worst Total Drama episodes. Thanks a lot, Scott. But having said that, why do I like Mike so much? Mike is not only a really interesting and unique character, one which the show hasn't seen before, but his character dynamics with Zoe and Maria and even his own personalities was really fun to watch. And the fact that the personalities kept balancing out each other never got old, and whenever Mike was on screen, it was always really fun. And this may be an unpopular opinion, but I thought that Mike's subplot was the most entertaining part of All Stars, which honestly does go to show how bad All Stars was, seeing as the subplot took place in Mike's head rather than, you know, the actual competition. And credit where credit is due, I thought that Mal was a pretty good villain, all things considered.
Wait a minute. Didn't you say that Mal was a really bad character?
Not really. A character is how good you are, and a villain is how good you play your role. Putting the fact that Mal was a really harmful representation of DID to aside, he was honestly a pretty good villain. Him using Mike's kind-hearted reputation to his advantage to pull players like Zoe and Cameron on his side was really smart. And his rivalry with Alejandro is really entertaining because they were both on equal footing, with both getting the upper hand at some point or another, with characters like Alejandro and Duncan acting as obstacles to make Mal's journey harder. And it's not like Mal's strategies were perfect either, because characters like Alejandro and Zoe question his motives and actions, which makes him even more realistic as a villain, because not every villain gets away with everything scot-free. And Mal's strategy was so good that he made it all the way to the finals. Keep in mind, this is just scratching the surface of what made Mal such a good villain, because I do want to make a video covering why I thought Mal worked. Back to Mike, and if your character is so good to the point I have to do some background research on you, then it just goes to show that, yeah, you're a really solid character. And out of all of the non-Generation 1 characters, Mike is easily the best one. Easy S tier. On to Joe, and out of everyone in the Revenge of the Island cast, Joe was easily the most entertaining one. Whether it would be her rivalry with Brick, or her competitive attitude, whenever she's on screen it's really entertaining. Additionally, out of all of the Total Drama Revenge of the Island characters, Joe easily has the most entertaining character dynamics, whether it would be with Brick, Lightning, Cameron, Dawn, and Maria, you name it, Joe excels and never fails to disappoint. And despite Revenge of the Island only having 13 episodes, it was still plenty of time for Joe to be a multi-layered character, as despite her cutthroat and competitive nature, we learned that in episode 6, she felt insecure about not being feminine like other gals, and it's really a shame that it never got touched on after that. And in the end, I feel like that's Joe's biggest weakness, potential. It could have been really interesting to watch Joe develop in terms of how she handles her insecurities, what her home life was like. Like, could you imagine how much better Revenge of the Island would have been if Joe was the main antagonist? But from what we did see from Joe is a very entertaining character, and if she lasted one more episode, she absolutely would have been in the S tier. For now, however, A tier. You know, Revenge of the Island actually had a really solid cast. Besides Stacy, who was made for cannon fodder, everyone who I've ranked up until now has been either in neutral or above, so I sure hope that no character this season breaks the chain. Okay, so like unpopular opinion, I don't like Scott. He was a terribly written villain and he was just unfunny. Look, I said this video was going to be filled with unpopular opinions. First, let's start with the positives. I thought that one scene of him and Courtney in the 100th episode of Total Drama was pretty funny. Yeah, that is honestly very impressive considering the fact that Scott in Total Drama All-Stars, in my opinion, just genuinely wasn't funny, especially with the way he dragged out jokes of how stupid he was. Like, for some characters, it works, but it doesn't work for Scott because one, he was completely different to how he was in Revenge of the Island, so where did that character development come from? Oh boy, off-screen character development, my favorite. And two, it's Total Drama All-Stars. Like, everything around Scott has Scott's humor, so what Scott says is not funny or special. So Scott's jokes do just come off as flat. Okay, how about Scott as a villain? He had to have been good, right? He threw the challenges just so the other team can have a false sense of security, which led to him being the only person in the merge not in an alliance, therefore putting him in the weakest position. Oh yeah, he did have that one alliance with Zoe, which got dropped just because the writers thought it would be funny to abuse someone for the whole 20 minutes because of their DID. Yeah, in episode 9, like Grand Theft Auto, Scott abuses Mike just because of his DID. Like, what was the moral here? Like, why do people like Scott? I'm going to make a video touching on why Scott failed as a villain because I feel like putting it here just genuinely wouldn't do it justice. But yeah, Scott sucks. End of discussion. Fuck you. Finally I can talk about a good character again, and Zoe is actually pretty cool. For starters, she has some of the best character dynamics in Revenge of the Island, and no matter which character she got paired up with, Mike, Anne-Maria, Dawn, heck, even Scott in episode 8, it was really fun to watch. And even in All-Stars, her interactions with the older generation characters like Alejandro, Duncan, and Gwen was honestly quite fun, with the highlight of her character definitely being her relationship with Mike, as the two have a lot of synergy with each other. However, I feel like the biggest issue with Zoe's character is that she kind of comes across as boring and a Mary Sue. Not only is she pretty much nice girl next door, but in Total Drama All-Stars, she won 3 immunity challenges in a row, and her Total Drama placements were weirdly good as well, as she made it 3rd place in Revenge of the Island and made it to the finals of All-Stars. So out of everyone in the Revenge of the Island cast, Zoe definitely comes across as a writer's pet. However, with how layered Zoe's character is, I feel like it could be forgiven. Something that I found really interesting about Zoe's character was the existence of Commando Zoe, as it was stated in Revenge of the Island that she had a pretty lonely childhood, and so seeing her make a friend like Mike only for it to be taken away from her, through Mike's necklace being destroyed, was honestly quite interesting, and I do definitely wish that Commando Zoe was more touched upon. And it would definitely be more interesting to watch than Zoe's constant naivete, especially in All-Stars, which I get that it makes sense considering her situation, and how close she was to Mike. However, I feel like they did make her a little bit too vulnerable, and a little bit dumb, but that may just be me. Despite being a little bit boring, Zoe was still really fun to watch, and for that I do have to give her the A tier. Next, let's talk about the GOAT, Lightning, and what's not to love about Lightning? Whenever Lightning was on screen, he never disappointed with how funny he was, and despite his competitive and arrogant nature, not only in Revenge of the Island, but the entirety of Total Drama. And I also liked the character dynamic that he had with Joe, as despite both contestants being very competitive, Lightning felt a lot nicer and a lot more of a team player. Which begs the question, why was Lightning the antagonist of the last 2 episodes of Revenge of the Island? Like, I get that Scott was a bad villain, however, wouldn't Joe have worked as a better antagonist? And I get that they were trying to make Cameron seem like the underdog, but keep in mind, during the team phase, Cameron only lost 2 challenges, and one of them didn't matter because it was a non-elimination round, and Cameron also won 2 immunities in a row. So no, Cameron was not the underdog, and I don't understand why they had to villainize Lightning to make Cameron seem like a even bigger hero. Additionally, I didn't like the subplot of Lightning's dad betting all of his Super Bowl rings on Lightning to win, because they forced it onto us within the last episode just to make us feel bad for Lightning and sort of root for him to win, even though they've clearly established that Lightning was too aggressive of a player to make us feel bad for him. However, All Stars did put him back to his funny and positive character, which I did appreciate. Despite Lightning clearly not being a layered character, he was still one of the funniest characters in the show, so how could I not put him into A tier? Rounding out the Revenge of the Island cast relatively strong, we have Cameron. And I have a weird history with Cameron, because back in 2020, Cameron actually used to be my favourite Total Drama character. Perhaps it was his nerdy personality, perhaps it was his underdog storyline, perhaps I just felt bad for him and related to him, but I just loved him. Which begs the question, where does he rank now? Honestly, he's still a really good character. Firstly, like Joe and Zoe, Cameron has a lot of interesting character dynamics, whether it be Mike, Anne-Maria, Zoe, Lightning, and especially Joe. Whenever he interacts with another character, it's always very interesting to watch. Secondly, the character arc he goes through in Revenge of the Island, going from a weak and fragile bubble boy to someone who can hold his own as the show progresses, was one of the best written storylines, and it was very fun to watch Cameron grow as a person. Despite this, in comparison to the other characters like Joe, Lightning, or Mike, I didn't really think that Cameron was that entertaining to watch. This may just be me, but honestly he just came off a bit boring sometimes, especially when he clinged on a little bit too much to Mike and Zoe. It was somewhat bearable in Revenge of the Island, seeing as he also interacted with characters like Joe and Lightning. However, in All Stars, he was pretty much glued to either Mike or Zoe. Or Sierra, but... yeah, I didn't really like how they reversed Cameron's character development just to give Sierra something to do, which wasn't a very good thing at that. But I will say, Iron Cam is probably the coldest thing I've ever seen in my life. Cameron was a character that I do think could have been a little bit better, but for the most part, he was still pretty solid, so B tier. So now that we've finished ranking all of the Gen 2 characters, who's next?
Krabby, oh my goodness! Squidward!
Okay, perhaps I'm over-exaggerating, because unlike most Total Drama fans, I actually really enjoyed Pockettail Island, not just the season, but the cast as well. However, admittedly, the characters were underdeveloped, so seeing as I wouldn't have much to say about them, for the first few characters, I'm just going to go through a lightning round just to give my brief thoughts. Starting with Beardo. I like Beardo. I know I'm in the minority for this, but I think Beardo's a pretty good character. I understand that a lot of people find him really annoying because all he does is beatbox. However, I like that Beardo's beatboxing acts as a way of communication for him as he's too shy to speak. And honestly, I thought it was really great characterization for an introvert like Beardo. However, I can only rank him so high because, well, he only lasted 1 episode. There wasn't really too much we could have went off with his character, so I do wish Beardo does come back and do a lot better. So C tier. From a gimmick character I like to a gimmick character I don't like, let's talk about Leonard. And honestly, Leonard is just not that funny. He comes off as really annoying, and didn't really serve too much to the plot. And to make matters worse, he was the only non-Gen 1 character to be in Redonkulous Race, and was a cannon fodder there too, which was honestly very disappointing. Because screen time that could have went to a more deserving character like, I don't know, Beardo, was ultimately given to Leonard was just not that great. But honestly, at least Leonard didn't annoy me. He was just there and wasn't a very good character. So, first F tier character. From bad to worse, let's talk about Rodney. And if Leonard's gimmick of being a wizard wasn't funny, then I'm sorry, but Rodney's gimmick of having a crush on every single girl on the island was just even worse. Whenever Rodney was on screen, it would always be a moment of him just simping for someone. It could have been Jasmine, it could have been Scarlet, it could have been Amy. It was genuinely very annoying to watch. And him stuttering and fumbling his lines definitely did not help his case either. And what makes matters worse is that whereas with characters like Beardo and Leonard we only get to see like 1 or 2 episodes of, we had to deal with 4 episodes of Rodney, which was just so painful to watch. So well done Rodney, you're somehow worse than Stacy. But don't worry, you're not worse than Scott. Amy and Sammy, the textbook definition of wasted potential. Pretty much the good twin, bad twin stereotype, and it's not really that fun to watch, especially since for her entire screen time, Amy just harasses Sammy, which is honestly such a shame because I do think there was a lot they could have done with this stereotype. Like, why didn't Amy go through character development where she starts to appreciate her twin sister? But no, let's just have Amy's entire character be focused on bullying Sammy. And in most cases, hostile characters like Heather and Alejandra typically work, but not for Amy because she's not a very well layered character. As for Sammy, credit where credit is due, they were going for a direction with her, as they did develop her friendship with Jasmine, and she did last a bit longer without Amy. So you'd think that they would have done more with Sammy, such as developing her friendship with Jasmine even more, or heck, even getting a relationship with Topher, but no. Instead, Amy comes back in the game just so they can have an excuse to eliminate Sammy. So all the potential she could have had was gone, and she ended up being a sympathy magnet, which are really boring characters to watch. Which is made even worse considering that after Amy's departure, Sammy was actually one of the most interesting characters this season, for the 1 episode she had. Amy can go an F. Whilst she's a really bad character, credit where credit is due, she did have some funny moments. And Sammy is C tier. They did quite a bit of her character, but unfortunately it wasn't enough, and I do wish she did get some more screen time without Amy. Moving on to Ella, and I actually quite like Ella. She's just a very sweet and charming character. And I understand what I said about Sammy and how I don't like sympathy magnets, which is true in this case as well, but at least with Ella she did have more storylines going for her. For example, her quote-unquote relationship with Dave. And I will admit they did tap in way too much into the Disney princess persona, as seen especially through Ella's design. However, in some ways, I do feel like it does work in her favor, especially with how comedic some of the moments with the animals were. Ella is a very fun character, however she didn't really have a lot of screen time and she did come across as very one note, so B tier. Do you know that feeling where you watch a season at first and don't really care for a certain character, but then you watch it again and think, huh, this character's actually very good? Well, that is me with Topher, because man, this character is honestly comedy gold. Firstly, I love the concept that he's pretty much Chris McClane's biggest fan. And yeah, they kinda did it with Sierra, but she felt more like a Total Drama super fan than a Chris McClane fan, so this was kind of the first time. And man, does it work. The character dynamic between Topher and Chris is very fun to watch. Whether it would be at the beginning where Chris actually appreciated Topher, or at the end where Chris started to get annoyed at Topher. Topher had high levels of charisma through his speech and it was just really fun to watch, as he honestly had some of the funniest moments in the show.
Everybody bring something good, okay? Hey-ya!
I'll bring my face!
Honestly, my biggest issue with Topher is, like Ella, the fact that he didn't really have a lot of screen time, as he did feel like missed potential. Through knowing a lot of information about Chris and even stealing his phone, he could have been a very entertaining villain who had access to a lot of the contestants and their information. But instead, he was kind of relegated to a one-note background character, which wasn't bad by any means, but I feel like they could have done a lot more with him. As the second funniest Puck 2 Island character, on top of having interesting dynamics with characters like Chris and Jasmine, Topher places high A tier. On to Dave, and hold on, this tier list doesn't look right. There we go. Okay, credit where credit is kind of due. Unlike Scott, Dave is actually a pretty well written character, but honestly, he's just such an annoying character who just really annoys me. Like, I understand that Dave is a subversion of the straight guy character trope as he ends up becoming crazier than everyone through the environment he's in, But I'm sorry, he was just very annoying throughout the entire season as well. Him reacting to the shenanigans that Beardo and Leonard do is just not funny. And his obsession with Sky is very weird, especially because he tries to kill her by the end. Like, at least with Scott, he had the 100th episode anniversary, but with Dave, what is there to him that's actually good? Okay, I'm done talking about this terrible character. Anyway, Scarlett's alright. Although, at the same time, what a fall from grace. Scarlett started out very strong, as I liked the dynamic she had being the straight man to whatever Max did, as it led to some very funny scenes. And honestly, she had a pretty good strategy as well, through flying under the radar, and following strategies from other people. Because if the idea worked, she would live for another day, but if not, then she'd know who to vote out. But man, did they drop the ball in episode 10 Scarlet Fever. They tried to make her a twist villain, which just didn't work, and it just wasn't fun to watch at all. Especially given the fact that she would have gotten out in the same episode as well. All of that calmness she once had is just gone, and she ends up becoming this evil psychopath. Honestly, if Scarlett didn't go through that character assassination, she would be a lot higher, but for now, D tier. So remember when I said that Topher was the second funniest Park Tour Island character? Guess who's the first? That's right, we have Max. And man is Max a funny character. And okay, I get it, Max doesn't really have a lot of substance, but at the same time, he was still really funny. And as for why I ranked Max so high because of his humor, and yet ranked Scott so low because of his humor, I honestly don't even know. Max is just so funny. Also, he looks like Bling Bling Boy.
I just took a DNA test, turns out I'm 100% bling bling boy.
神よ、寛大なるお計らい、感謝に絶えませぬ。Thank you, 神様.
You know, with all the well-developed characters in S tier such as Heather, Alejandro, Mike, it feels weird putting Max in there, but I don't care, this is my tier list. And you know what? Max is better than Alejandro, because there is no way that Alejandro is better than Peak Fiction. Moving to a less good but still pretty solid Park Tour Island character, let's talk about Jasmine. And out of all of the Park Tour characters, Jasmine interacts with the most amount of people, which makes her the most interesting and the most layered. And for the most part, the interactions were good as well, whether it be with Sammy, Topher, especially Sean, you name it. And on top of that, she was a very strong player despite her fears. Not only physically, but socially as well, especially when she takes charge as team captain. In saying that though, Jasmine does face a few problems which does make her not rank that high. The biggest issue I have is the small conflict that Jasmine and Sean got into. And whilst I'll admit, from her perspective it's understandable, during the conflict she came off as quite weak and very annoying. And when the two, mainly Jasmine, got into that feud, it was such a pain to sit through, as it also affected her interactions with characters like Sky. But in saying that, I'm glad that they made up, and I'm glad that they're now living happily in Sean's bunker. Yeah, she was a solid character. Despite being boring in some instances and annoying in others, I still liked her, so B tier. So remember when I said that I didn't care about Topher before, but rewatching the season made him really love him? Well, I hated Sugar before, and this season honestly made me like her so much. And remember when I said that Max was comedy gold? You know who else is comedy gold? Sugar. And despite being one of the funniest contestants of all time, she was also a pretty entertaining villain. Wow, a comedic villain who's funny yet is also good at their villainous role? Take note, Scott. Now, admittedly, in the first half of the season, I did not like Sugar at all. She was probably one of my least favorite characters. And it was mainly because she kept targeting Ella. And what I said about Amy applies here. Only bullying one character seems a bit forced and just isn't fun to watch. However, once Ella left, Sugar's character immediately improved. She was funnier, she was more entertaining, and we even got to see her rivalry with Sky unfold, and oh my, was it a good rivalry. Definitely underrated for sure. And so, rewatching Sugar, I was pleasantly surprised by how good her character actually is, and makes me regret ranking her so low in the All-Stars video. Because honestly, Sugar, and one other character who we'll get to later, did carry the merge of Park Tour Island, because of how entertaining they were. And her literally destroying every single challenge and then getting out in the funniest way possible is just so entertaining to watch. But yeah, A tier, and if Ella wasn't around, she could have honestly had a very good shot of being an S tier. But yeah, overhated for sure. On to Sky, and I don't really vibe with Sky that much. Out of all of the nice girl next door character tropes in total drama, Sky is probably one of the worst characters in terms of it, and definitely isn't as good as Zoe. A problem that I have with Sky is that she's sort of a Mary Sue and comes off as weirdly good in the challenges, which makes sense at first, seeing as out of all of the Pocketeal Island characters, Sky is definitely the most normal. However, she ends up becoming a very boring contestant. And it's not like Zoe, who has a lot more personality and is just more endearing as a character. Because in a way, Sky feels like the cornflakes to Zoe's Frosted Flakes, aka a lot more bland and one-dimensional. Additionally, her relationship with Dave was so toxic. Not just on Dave's end, but Sky also just wasn't that fun to watch during the relationship. It's a bit hard to explain, but during the relationship she felt very pushy, which just wasn't that fun to watch. Although, credit where credit is due, she did have some very entertaining moments, especially in the later half, as seen through her rivalry with Sugar. And I do love how emphasized her competitiveness was through this rivalry, as it did honestly bring both Sugar and Sky to their best potential. But other than that, Sky just wasn't that fun of a character, so E tier. And ending this video off in a high note, we have Zombie Boy Sean. And to be honest, Sean is a very entertaining and interesting character, both in conception and execution. At the beginning, Sean was definitely a loner, which does make sense considering his paranoia. However, as the season progressed, he got to interact with the contestants more and even develop his confidence, especially for his relationship with Jasmine. However, Jasmine wasn't the only character who he got good interactions with, because somehow he even made Dave a likable contestant, which... how? Man, Sean is such a magic man. Although, one issue that I do have with Sean is that his zombie paranoia did get a little excessive sometimes, to the point that it even affected his relationship with Jasmine. But I'm glad it all got patched up, and yeah, Sean was honestly a very deserving winner. Not only for his entertainment value, but also for his character development. So, good job, Zombie Boy, rounding out the tier in A. And yeah, this is the current tier so far. Again, I'm sorry for not uploading in so long. I started production in this video since December, and oh god, it's April. And I don't know, I've been feeling so burnt out. Please, I just want to see my family again, please.